Welcome to this special edition of the New Stack Makers on the Road. We're here at HashiConf Global in beautiful Los Angeles, California. Discussions with technologists giving you their expertise and insights to help you with your everyday work. Infrastructure enables innovation. HashiCorp provides consistent workflows to provision, secure, connect, and run any infrastructure for any application.
Hey everyone, here for the New Stack Makers on the road at HashiConf in Los Angeles, California. And I'm here with Armon Dadgar, co-founder and CTO at HashiCorp. Hi Armon, how are you?
Doing well, doing great. Thanks so much for making the time and being here.
Well, I'm so happy to be here. I kind of feel like the New Stack grew up with HashiCorp. I remember when you launched in 2014, I think there was one of your first user conference was in Portland, where we hail from, and you know your growth has just been so interesting to watch, and especially looking at it from an open source perspective. And I wrote a story this week on standardizing and industrializing, the world of the cloud and how open source is equated with the standardization for HashiCorp. The industrialization really is how you think about companies can go at scale. So once the technologies are standardized, you can then use those technologies to scale your own organization. My question is about how do you manage your engineering organization with a core committer group internally and an external group who are contributing integrations back into the core? Now, I expect there's a lot of people who are contributing to the core who are external, but then you do the final approval, right? How do you think about organizing your engineering team, with that approach?
It's a good question. So I think in many ways, I think we actually look like a lot of our customers. So we organize around effectively 5 product groups is the way I'd put it. So we have our infrastructure team, that's sort of Terraform and Packer. We have our security group, Vault and Boundary, networking console, and then application, Vagrant Nomad, Waypoint. And then the 5th group is our cloud platform team, right? So very much the enablers of the other 4, and they're sort of the internal customers of the platform team. Then within each of those groups, within each of the application lines, effectively it's a blended engineering team, right? So part of them might be working on the cloud delivered solution. So it might be working on Terraform Cloud. Part of that team might be working on Terraform Core. Part of that might be working on sort of open source providers like the Amazon provider or the Azure provider, et cetera. So it's sort of this blended model within each of the product groups. And then those open source teams are both working on the core themselves, but also acting as the reviewers for the community. So as we're getting pull requests or as we're getting issues, the engineering teams are directly engaged with the community. And I think that's part of what makes HashiCorp work so well is that our engineering community is very much in touch with the community because they're not sort of abstracted or buffered through some other team, right? They directly engage with our community through GitHub.
So how did you cultivate that from the start to be a company that has an approach that is much different than you see, for instance, from the cloud native community?
In some sense, I think it goes back to me and Mitchell were open source practitioners ourselves, right? We cut our own teeth in open source. We learned about building software in open source. We participated in other open source communities. So, for us, it felt very natural from the beginning because we looked at it and said, okay, what are the best parts of open source that we like, right? We like the parts where, you're collaborating with people. It has the sort of async global kind of community. Right. The parts we don't like are where we saw a lot of hey, is there a lot of bureaucracy around it? Or is there sort of unclear in terms of how do you participate or drive the roadmaps of these things?
Right.
And I think we've all seen, some of these open source projects end up being kind of a 3-headed monster because they're being, there's not a clear direction or driver to it.
Right.
And I think you see other communities where you have sort of that benevolent dictator for life model, right? The sort of BDFL, where there's sort of a real clarity and real sort of authority around, hey, here's where the product's going in the direction, and that gives it a consistency of vision. And so we sort of looked at all that and said, okay, well, it's natural as we build our products that we want to recreate the best parts that we liked in the community. And so I think you see us sort of replicate and build a lot of that within HashiCorp. And it just was sort of a natural outcrop of us being a practitioner.
So thinking of your engineering culture, how do you think about then the process of community development, and how does your engineering teams play a role in community development?
Yeah, this is a huge part. And actually, I'd say it goes even beyond community development into the application architecture itself. So even as we think about the application architecture, I'll talk about Terraform to make it simpler. The way we designed it was around this notion of there's this sort of core of Terraform that's the heart of the engine, where a lot of the complexity sits. And we understand that, like, hey, if you're a weekend warrior and you want to contribute something, you're not going to go read this massively complicated code base to understand how it works just to do an integration. So instead, we built a very specific integration surface area for Terraform to say, hey, if you want to do a plugin for Terraform that lets it support, some new service, great, we'll have a really well-defined plugin, a really well-defined SDK. So you can do that in 200 lines of code without having to learn, the deep heart and inner working of how Terraform works. So that architecture from a software perspective, we call it sort of a core plus plugin model. Mm-hmm. That's the sort of model we use in most of our software. Because then from a community development perspective, it allows us to go do it in a way that's much easier for the community, where we say, you don't have to go learn how Terraform works. Here's a plugin, here's a prescriptive scaffold, here's some example code on how to do it, here's an SDK. And then around that, we can actually wrap an official partner development program. So anyone can write a provider and open source and have it community driven. But then if you want us to certify it and go through that, we have a whole process that's well defined around us sort of partnering. And I think that well-defined golden path is why Terraform has like 2,400 providers today. It's because it's very, very easy, right? Anyone can go do it in a weekend, right? And so I think we spent a lot of time thinking about it from architecture to process to community, how to make it really easy.
So then how does the practitioner get valued?
Yeah, I think for them it's sort of twofold, right? One is like, how do we make it really easy for them to discover all of these things? And to the extent possible, they shouldn't have to write any of this stuff. So for them, it's really a focus on discovery. It's the Terraform registries. It's all of those kind of things. But then it's like, how do we let them scratch their own itch? Because inevitably there's going to be a bug. There's going to be a feature that's missing. There's some capability they want. And that's where the fact that it's open source and then there's a really well-defined sort of path for them to say, hey, you want to add this new feature? Great. Here's how you can do a pull request and add that in. Here's how you can fork it and customize it to fit your need. And there's a sort of a well-defined path for them. So it's really about enabling them, whether it's I'm taking it off the shelf and that works for me, or hey, I need to customize it or build something and let's make that really easy for you.
So then how do you think about your own values as it relates to your engineering team? I was reading about them on your site, and you have values such as pragmatism, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, the lesson for us is like it's very hard to be dogmatic in infrastructure. So we looked at it and said, what do we value in a community? We want it to be a very professional environment, right? So we want it to be, welcoming of everyone. That's why things like kindness is, I think our number 2 principle, right? At the same time, we realize everyone's starting their journey in a different place. So it's hard for us to say everything should be immutable. Everything should be cattle and not pets. And, great, that's nice if you're greenfield and modern infrastructure, but not everyone is there. So let's be pragmatic and say, okay, you're coming from maybe a more traditional infrastructure. How do we take you on a journey with us? Right? So I think pragmatism is a big part. I think humility is a big part, right? I think, oftentimes we're learning from our community as well. It's like, I don't think we go in and say HashiCorp's the only people who know what they're doing and everybody else should follow our lead. It's right. Let's be humble about it. We have an opinion. We might not have the best opinion, but we're going to learn from our community and sort of interact. So I think our HashiCorp principles play a big part in the engineering culture and how we sort of engage our community.
So then how does that help, for instance, with the cultural aspects of the community, be it the practitioners, the partners, and internally in terms of diversity and inclusivity?
I think it's made a huge impact. And I think, honestly, one of the things we learned was, a lot of open source communities weren't clear about what are their principles and how do they enforce those norms. And I think you saw them become very toxic, right? And I think we've seen sort of many, many of those communities where it kind of goes off the rails because nobody's playing that role. And I think to us, we've always been really clear, and we've sort of been the police of our communities, right? We said these are our community standards, and these are the standard whether you're at an in-person conference like this, whether you're online on GitHub, whether you're on our mailing list, whether you're in our sort of virtual communities. And then we enforce them, right? There's people that we have ejected from our communities, right? And I think you have to, because if you don't do that, you enable the worst people to sort of hijack it, right? And then it pulls it. And then who wants to be a member of that? Right. Not the people who are new and coming into technology, not the people who are from diverse backgrounds, right? Because those are the people who get alienated. And so I think it's super important for us that's like you maintain those principles and you act as the police actively.
I'm curious on your thoughts about current trends that we are seeing at the new stack. And one of those trends that we're starting to see discuss more is platform engineering. I'm curious on how you define platform engineering.
Yeah, it's a great conversation. It's a great topic because, in some sense to me, it takes me all the way back to the conversation of like, what is DevOps 6-7 years ago?
Right.
Right. And I think at the time, there was this view of it's the unicorn developer, right? They're writing your JavaScript in the morning. They're deploying infrastructure in the afternoon. They're setting security policy in the evening. And that's how you do DevOps is you combine DevOps and security into one, or DevSecOps or whatever. And my view is like, okay, but that flies in the face of all human progress, right? In the same way, I'm not a truck driver and an airline pilot and a power plant operator, right? Like those are specialized roles with specialized skills. So to me, I think bringing it back to platform engineering, you start to say, okay, great. My dev teams, they should be really good at dev, but who should be really good at operating cloud infrastructure? Who should be really good at providing a platform capability that my app dev teams then consume? So to me, that's the heart of platform engineering. Right? It goes back to that view that even we have, which is like we have a platform team. Their customers are our internal application teams, right? So they operate the HCP platform. They provide the core infrastructure. They provide the chassis for us to deliver cloud services. And then our application teams, whether it's Terraform or Vault or Console, are customers of that internally to build and release their cloud applications. So the heart to me of platform engineering is really saying, I have an internal set of customers. How do I effectively enable them to deliver applications, cloud software, without having to go be experts in the underlying infrastructure, right?
Is that an approach you're seeing with customers too? Because when I heard Dave McNally speak the other day, he talked about the identity focus that companies will have when they realize that they're in the cloud, right? Yep. They'll realize infrastructure as code issues that they need to think about. They'll think about the services, right? And so you can think about Terraform, you can think about Vault, and with identity you can think about Boundary,
right? And
with services you think about you think about Console, right?
Right.
Now, does the platform team does the platform teams have to then decide what service discovery availability is there for the application teams, right?
Exactly. Yep.
And then the application teams then build out the applications. Then how do you see security emerging into this model now? Because now we're thinking about security baking into that platform engineering concept. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I think in some ways the way we talk about it is not just security. I think if we look at kind of classic enterprise, there was almost this siloed approach to you have your network team, you have your ops team, you have your security team, maybe you have your developer, experience team, and each of these operated in their own silo. And now I think what we're seeing is these platform teams are sort of an aggregation of all of those, right? Because if you think about cloud, it's not like I'm before it was like, great, I bought my data center, I buy my Cisco gear, my networking team sets it up, and then they throw it over the fence. But it doesn't make sense to bring up a cloud infrastructure. There's not Cisco gear running, right? And I don't have a separate firewall for my security team to manage. It's all part and parcel of the cloud infrastructure. So the networking concern, the security concern, the infrastructure concern, they've all become one. It's sort of a cloud infrastructure concern. So we're seeing those platform teams take ownership over that broader scope and say, you know what, all of these are logically part of the core platform. Because it doesn't make sense to say I'm going to bring up an insecure cloud infrastructure and then throw it over the fence to security and say, okay, now go fix it, right? Like, why wouldn't I just bring up a secure infrastructure to begin with?
Right.
Like,
let's start from the secure infrastructure point of view.
Don't try and bolt it on afterward.
Right. But internally at HashiCorp, do you have a team that looks at other tools out there for instance, to help manage a developer portal or I know you use your own products, but do you also have a team that looks at other third-party products too?
So I would consider all of that as part of like that core platform team's responsibility. So they pull in third-party products like GitHub, Circle CI, Datadog,
right?
Artifactory. Those all get delivered by them as a service to the rest of our teams, right? Because all the teams need observability, all the teams need artifact management,
right?
So they do think about that, and that's part of their charter. But again, for them, it's like they're not the end customer. The end customers are our application teams who are then building on top of them.
My last question, a provocative one. What would HashiCorp look like if it were a proprietary technology company?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think it'd be a much harder company to scale. And what I mean by that is if you take a look at like a Terraform community or a Vault community, there's thousands of contributors, and that's what solves the integration problem. Right? And so if you said we were proprietary and said, hey, how many engineers would it take to build 2,000 Terraform integrations? Right? It'd be a whole hell of a lot more people than we have today. Right? And so I think fundamentally what open source helps you solve is the fact that modern infrastructure has this really wide surface area of integration, and I don't think you can solve that as a proprietary business, right? Like I think it's just practically speaking very, very difficult. So I think the challenge for us would be, if we were a proprietary business, I don't think we'd be able to have nearly the breadth of integration. Yeah, we could maybe cover the core cloud providers, but you'd have 50 Terraform providers, not 2,500 Terraform providers, right?
So how do you stay away from that edge? Like, because you did introduce an enterprise product, you didn't take away features from the open source product, you added features to it. Is that the solution, to always make it additive instead of subtractive?
Yeah, I think that's a big lesson, right? And I think we've certainly never removed anything from the open source community, but we've seen other people do it. And I think one thing you learn is there's an extreme loss aversion, right? Because I think people rightly feel like there was a bit of a bait and switch, right? And so I think for us, that trust of our open source community has always been paramount for us. So I think what we've tried to do is be really, really good stewards and say, you know what? We're never taking things away. We've stuck with our Mozilla public license since day one. There's never been a licensing change. And we've been clear to the community on, here's the way we think about open source versus enterprise. Our open source is not crippleware. It's not vaporware. You want to manage 1 million virtual machines with Terraform? Do it. Knock yourself out. There's nothing that prevents you. But the technical piece is what we solve in open source. The organizational complexity is what we solve in enterprise. So it's like, great, if you care about compliance problems, regulatory problems, single sign-on, governance, you're probably not a hobbyist and you're probably not a startup. Right? You're probably a commercial business, right, that's getting real value out of us solving those governance challenges or those scale challenges. And yeah, those are what we do, in our enterprise product because we're solving real commercial problems for you. Right? And we think it's a fair value exchange. And I think by having that really honest conversation with an open source community, then it's like, okay, yeah, we get it. We understand why feature X is open source and why feature Y is enterprise. And then it's just about building that trust by being consistent. And I think for the last 10 years, I think we've built that trust kind of brick by brick.
Armon, thank you so much for your time. And thank you for having us at HashiConf. It's been a great show, and I've learned a ton, so appreciate it.
Thank you all for being here. Appreciate it.
Yeah. If you like this video, please give us a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, you can always subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're on all the major social media platforms. You can always find us at thenewstack.io. We hope to see you soon.